Hello, let's just get started. And I'm starting the recording. So welcome to Christmas, the rest of the story, episode 1. And tonight we're going to start and dive deep and dive fast into all of this great information that I've prepared. And yes, I'm recording this and I'm going to make this into a series. I'm not sure how long it will be before it is released and available, but thank you for being here, those who are live, because we are getting started and we are recording. All right, so be blessed. Christmas, the rest of the story, episode 1. And this first episode, if I can get the 2 yeses that change history. And first, we are going to start at the beginning. Yes, we're going to start at the beginning because this is where the story begins. The story doesn't begin in the manger. We have to back all the way up to the beginning, and we have, if we want to see the context of this entire story and the importance it played in the history of all mankind and every person that's been born and is alive on the planet right now. So we've got to back it all the way up. So first of all, let's talk about we were created to live in nature, sinless for eternity. We were created to live in a garden that God prepared for us. God prepared this garden for his people. This is the natural habitat of human beings. You know how you go to the zoo and you see animals in their natural habitat, whether they're desert animals or they're animals that live in the jungle or in the bush, right? Well, we humans were not created to live in houses made of brick and wood and whatever, or apartment buildings. We were created to live in nature, in a garden. And God looked at the garden as he had prepared it for man, and he said, it is good. And what does that mean? That meant that everything in the nature, everything in the garden had a purpose. Everything had a role to play. There was nothing wasted. There was nothing that was, useless. Everything there was for a reason. And before there was ever sin or dis-ease on the planet Earth, there was a cure hidden in the plants, because before the foundation of the earth, the Bible tells us the Lamb was slain. What does that mean? The Messiah he'd already made provision for sin to be redeemed before Adam and Eve had committed the original sin. And tonight we're going to really talk about Eve, okay? Because tonight we're going to talk about women. We're going to talk about women's role in his story. History is his story. It's the story of him, the Messiah, okay? And here we see in this story that the serpent was shrewder than any animal of the field. And let's just go back here, and I'm going to give you guys, I'm not going to give you all the scriptural context, but if you want it or whatever, you can ask me later, because I'm trying to get through a lot of this to the Christmas story. But the animal of the field that Adonai Elohim had made. And so it asked, this animal was not really an animal. Okay. This was one of the, if you look at the translation of this word nocton, this was actually a serpent. It also has divinity. So it was something that was godlike. It was one of probably a fallen angel that had taken possession or a form of an animal to trick and then the third part of the word is to a deceiver, okay? And it was a shining one or an illuminated one. And this creature came and it was trying to trick the woman, okay? And this woman was not weak and she was not dumb. This was the intelligence of Adam and Eve was unbelievable. They had the pure DNA. They were created in the image of God. So they were very, very intelligent, naive because maybe naive because they hadn't had a lot of experiences with people trying to tempt them and trip them up. Maybe, we can give them that, but they're very intelligent, much more than we could ever imagine. So the woman said to the serpent, and remember, this is not really a serpent. It's not a snake. She said, of the fruit of the trees we may eat. Now, remember that the trees, that very much power in the fruits and the vegetables and the plants. They were very powerful, and they caused, each plant had a purpose and a reason, right? And so when you would eat a fruit, it would have a certain effect on you. It would make you, maybe one would calm you and make you sleepy. One would make you up. These were so pure and potent. And of the fruit of the trees we may eat, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the middle of the garden, God said, you must not eat of it, and you must not touch it, or you will die. But the serpent said to the woman, you most assuredly won't die, for God knows that when you eat it, your eyes will be open and you will be like God, or like the gods, okay, knowing good and evil. And what that means is that they were beings, they were ascended beings, not as powerful as God, but the counsel of God, beings that were angels, fallen angels. And these were people that even were maybe more powerful. And they were like, you will be like them. And so she said, now she saw the tree was good for food, and it was a thing of lust for the eyes. All right, now let me talk to you really quickly about, in the Hebrew, this is not an apple, okay? This is what we've always been told, that it's an apple. But in the Hebrew tradition, this is very well known that this is actually a pomegranate. All right, so a pomegranate, they believe that before the fall, the pomegranate didn't have the hard and tough skin it has now. If you've ever seen a pomegranate, you see that it's red, it's juicy. And they believe that the original form of the pomegranate was like a red glass, and it was like the juice would just drip off the trees, and it was magnificently beautiful, almost like a ruby without the seeds. Okay, now the reason that we know that it's the pomegranate is because in the temple and in the tabernacle, one of the things that the Lord commanded Moses, and even in Solomon's temple, to decorate the temple with was the pomegranate. Even the bells on the robe of the priests were decorated with pomegranates, gold and silver. So the pomegranate was the major motif of the tabernacle and the temple. This was symbolizing something that had a powerful role in the story. Okay. Also, in the pomegranate, there are 613 seeds in every pomegranate. In the human body, if you would make a laundry list of all our parts, okay, all our organs, our tissues, our ligaments, there are 613 parts to the human body. Also, there are 613 commandments. There are not 10. There are 613. Actually, there are 611, but there are 2 commandments that all other commandments hang on. One is love the Lord your God with all your heart. The other one is love your neighbor as yourself. Okay. These were from the original 613 commandments. Those 2 are like branches from the pomegranate tree that all the other seeds of the pomegranate hang upon. So there's very rich tradition surrounding the pomegranate. So now you know, okay? So she took of that desirable lust of the eyes, that beautiful, a woman, look, can't resist something beautiful, hot, pinkish red and sparkling. It was maybe glistening in the sunlight, dripping with juice. And maybe this is why she was like, man, I want to eat that thing, right? We can't resist something sparkling and beautiful. And so the tree was good for food, and it was a thing of lust for the eyes, and the tree was desirable for imparting wisdom. So she took of its fruit and she ate, and she also gave to her husband. I've got to move my screen around here because I can't see. She gave it to her husband, and then he ate as well. So this is the yes, she gave in to temptation. Eve, who is the mother of all of us, She gave into temptation and it changed everything. No longer were we allowed to live in that garden. They were banished. There was a fiery cherub. There was a seraph or a serpent-like creature that guarded them from entering back in to the garden. So this is the sad part of the story. And this is what set everything else into motion. Now, when we read the Old Testament from Genesis all the way through till we get to the end of it, there are some really puzzling things that happen. Like the children of Israel trying to go back to the promised land. The children of Israel will fight wars, and God would go back to some tribes and he would say, kill everybody, kill their animals, right? He would say to other people, okay, you can spare these people. When the ark, when Noah went on the ark, there were certain animals that he took, and then he didn't take everything. He only took 2. Some of them he took 7 or 9. There's so many things that were like, why? It didn't make sense. But when you start looking at everything from the perspective of when Eve said yes to temptation, there was a plan for redemption in the future. And God had to change and protect the lineage of Eve so that from her seed, there would be a pure, another woman who would come and say yes, to trust him and redeem all mankind and have a second man, Adam. And I know this is deep, you guys, but that's what I'm all about. I'm all about the deep stuff. So that's what you're in for tonight. If this is interesting to you. So Eve said yes to history. She knew God for herself and his commandments. She was not dumb, but she said yes to temptation, the pomegranate. She said yes to her desires to be like God. That came from her pride because she wanted to be like, yeah, I want to be like God. I want to be smart. I want to be one of the rulers of the earth. And then she used her influence to tempt Adam. And she didn't take God seriously. She had a relationship with God, but for some reason she thought, maybe she thought, I'm God's favorite and he won't kill me. And he didn't. It was true, but she did die spiritually. And she did die to her future that she would have had, because the devil, the Bible says, the devil cometh not but to steal, kill, and destroy. He stole Eve's dreams. He killed her destiny, and he destroyed her future that would have been had she not given in to the temptation. And she was tempted by the fallen angel, and she wasn't even afraid of it. I mean, she conversed with this evil being and she was not afraid. Okay, so we're just going to make some parallels here between Eve, and there was a curse between her and the serpent, which is Hasatan, Satan. There was a curse, and the Lord said that there will be enmity, there will be strife, there will be a battle, there will be the woman will always be beat down, or the enemy will always try to beat down the woman, but the woman will come back and crush his head. So this was the prophetic word that God had to protect, that there would be a woman who would come forth in the future that would crush the head of Satan and everything he had planned to destroy all of mankind. So he thought he had tricked mankind, but there was another plan. So the man said, this is what Adam said. And I don't know if you know any men like this, but he said, hey, this woman you gave to be with me, she gave me of the tree and I ate. And then God said to the woman, what did you do? And she said, well, Adam blamed her. The serpent blamed, Eve blamed the serpent. And then there was the curse. Because you did this, cursed are you above all the livestock, above every animal of the field. In your belly you will go, you eat the dust all the days of your life. I will put animosity between you and the woman, between your seed and her seed. Okay, so that's all humankind, right? He will crush your head and you will crush his heel. To the woman he said, I will greatly increase your pain from conception to labor. In pain, you will give birth to children. Your desire will be toward your husband, and he will rule over you. So look, she gave up her seat of equality with her husband, but there was going to be a restoration. Okay. There was going to be a restoration. So that's not the end of the story. So there was a woman in the future named Mary. Okay. And this was not just any woman, But this is one of the things that Mary knew and every Jewish woman knew. And we're going to learn about some of the customs of the Hebrew women. And this has a lot to do with Mary and how she was raised. Every Shabbat, which is Friday night, the woman of the house in the Jewish household lights a candle to invite the presence of the Lord into her home. She lights a candle and she says a prayer, okay? And this is a Jewish tradition that women and girls around the world, they cover their eyes and they say a prayer inviting the presence of the Lord, because through a woman, the presence of the Lord left the home or the dwelling. And through a woman, because a woman said yes to temptation. So through the woman, in the Jewish, for thousands of years, they have invited the presence of the Lord into their home for the week during the Shabbat dinner, where they take 24 hours out and rest. And the woman rests. She doesn't cook. She doesn't clean. No one in the house does any work, but they just enjoy family, enjoy one another, and talk about God and do wholesome family things. This is a great tradition that we all can partake of if we want to. So the traditions of the devout Jewish woman, this is all pertaining to how Mary was raised and understanding the person that she was. So there was a devout Jewish woman that every other Jewish woman modeled, okay? The legendary beauty. First, her name was Sarai, Abraham's wife. But because God breathed on her and gave her favor, her name became Sarah. The changing of her name meant that God came and gave her favor. His presence was with her. Her Shekinah, the Shekinah glory was with her. She was the template for every Jewish woman's household. And she taught the women in Abraham's camp and all the Jewish women under her, even though she had no daughters. She was a mother to the women of Israel. And she taught women. She almost had like a school for women. Like she was the goal. She was hashtag goals for every Jewish woman. And she taught them that your tent, the letter bet in the Hebrew is the letter, it would be like our letter B. It's the second letter in the alphabet, but it's also the first word in the Bible, Bereshit, which is in the beginning. It is also the word for beginning. It's the word for blessed. And that letter bet is shaped like a three-sided tent. And the woman is responsible for those three sides, everything that comes in the tent. She is the fourth side. Bet is also the letter that symbolizes a woman. And we are in charge of our household. And we're that open side, we are there to stand and guard what comes into the house and what goes out of the house. Okay. The woman was responsible, as Sarah was. She had her tent over her tent. If you look and read in the Old Testament, say, "Oh, how beautiful are your tents, O Jacob." It talks about the beauty of the tents of Israel. She hosted the Shekinah glory, and the glory cloud rested over her tent for the favor of the Lord. She was also a designer. She designed beautiful fabrics, the tents of the Israelites, because she taught the women how to weave beautiful cloth and fabrics with bright colors in a time where there wasn't a lot of beauty. She was like a designer of tents, a designer of textiles. So her home was beautiful. She decorated her home and her tents and taught other women how to do it. She empowered other women. She had an altar in her home with a holy shewbread. Her dough was so blessed that travelers would come for miles to come and partake of her hospitality, because her bread was so blessed that they could go for 3 to 7 days on the energy they got because of the things that she put in her bread and the blessing of the Lord on her bread, as she blessed her bread and prayed over even the things that she cooked and her staff that worked with her in her kitchen. She had a menorah, and the presence of the Lord lived in there, a menorah that she lit, predating the tabernacle or the temple. So the things in the tabernacle were copied off of Sarah's tent. And think about the pomegranates. I mean, this might be something that she used to decorate with. She was given to hospitality. She was given to charity. People knew that they could come to her because she was a very wealthy woman, because Abraham's riches that he had, he was a tither. He was a man of God, and God blessed him. And she was a charitable woman that gave to people less fortunate than her, would come for miles to receive her charity. And she also established a red tent, because there was the women, when they were on their monthly cycle, would have to go stay in another tent because of the cleanliness, the laws of cleanliness, to remind them of the curse. And they would have to go there. And she established a red tent and a place for women to go rest while they were during their cycle. So she was an amazing woman. And we know how a woman in the ancient Jewish world would conduct her house. That was a devout Jewish woman. Okay. And I'm going to tell you how that Mary was this devout Jewish woman. She was not just any woman. She was from a wealthy, devout family. Her parents were childless, and they were very old. And her mother, we don't know her mother's name, but her father's name was Joachim. And in Luke chapter 3, so he was the grandpa. So did you know the grandpa's name, the Messiah's grandpa's name? He had two grandpas, Grandpa Joachim and Grandpa Jacob. Okay. So he had two of them. And Mary's father was a scroll synagogue scholar. He was dedicated to Torah, which is what there are 5 books of the Bible. He was devoted to it. Okay. He wasn't a rabbi. He wasn't a Levitical priesthood, because he was of the tribe of Judah, directly descended, could trace his lineage all the way back to Adam and Eve through the line of the kingly line of David. So he was from the tribe of Judah, a direct descendant of David the king, a direct descendant of Boaz, okay, and Ruth. He was a direct descendant of, of all the people that it was prophesied that a Messiah would come from the line of David, the root of Jesse, okay. So she was of this lineage. So she was like a princess, and her family was very, very wealthy. Okay. She was dedicated because her parents were so old when she was born, very similar to how Zechariah and Elizabeth, who were her cousins, had a child in their old age and they were barren. Okay. So very, very similar. Her birth was miraculous. She was dedicated to God at birth, and she knew she was chosen and special. We can only imagine that maybe there were prophets like Anna and Simeon in the temple at that time, waiting for the Messiah in Jerusalem, that maybe she had prophetic words over her life prophesying this when she was born. We don't know that, but it would be in the realms of possibility. Okay. Now, we know that she was cousin to Elizabeth, and she went to visit Elizabeth, and she was the wife of the high priest Zacharias, which is another like royal family. The high priest was the closest thing that the Jews would have to royalty, because their king Herod was a false king. We're going to talk about that next week. And Elizabeth had a miraculous pregnancy. And when Mary went to visit her in her pregnancy, Elizabeth's fetus, which would eventually be John the Baptist, was the first to recognize the Christ child. This shows us how that our God, even in the Bible, he mentioned that a fetus leapt for joy, the fetus inside Elizabeth, when she saw the Christ child. It was the first to recognize the Christ child, a fetus. And she was betrothed to Jacob. So she was highly favored. So let's note some more facts. She was a direct descendant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. She was specifically of the tribe of Judah. She was a descendant of Boaz, of David. And significantly, Luke traces her lineage all the way back to Adam. And this fits with Luke's purpose as he wrote to the Gentiles and emphasized that Jesus, Yeshua, is the Son of God who came to save all people. Now, where was Mary from? She was not from Nazareth, okay? But an hour's walk from Nazareth, which was like, a 10-minute drive, okay, is this beautiful city. And I've been here. This is called Sepphoris. It is the jewel of the Galilee, and the ruins are still there. These are some pictures of the ruins where she was actually from, okay? And we know this historically. This was a very, very wealthy Roman town, and a lot of the building and a lot of the it was one of the wonders of the world in the ancient times. A lot of the building happened during Mary's lifetime and during her son's lifetime. All right. This is where they had a very beautiful synagogue, and this is where her father studied Torah, and her father was most likely a very wealthy businessman. Okay, this city was highly advanced. It was established by the Romans, but Jews lived there. It's in Israel. And they had culture and technology that other cities in Israel did not have. So they had baths where people would go and congregate. They had hot and cold water. They actually had toilets where people would go and able to use an actual toilet, very much like the toilets we have today. And it was like public bathrooms because people didn't have them in their house, and they would come into the city center for everything. They actually had a shopping mall. Okay. If you look in this picture down here, where there's like a colonnade, this was columns. And on one side, there were the columns. In the middle, there was this beautiful tile walkway that went all the way through the city. And on the left were boutiques and shops. There was actual shopping mall. If you look at the picture up on the top here, there was a theater where they had actors and plays and all types of entertainment. And it was highly, highly cultured and very advanced in society and wealth. Now, there on the right here, there is a picture that I actually saw this when I was in Israel. This is no longer in Sepphoris. This is now in a museum, but this is called the Mona Lisa of Israel. And they found this tile floor in a woman's store. It would have been a woman's clothing boutique. And this tile floor look at the beauty of this tile mosaic here. And it was more advanced than anything probably in the known world, one of the most beautiful tile sculptures ever. Now, why is that important? Well, when it goes on to say in the Bible that Yeshua, Jesus, was a carpenter by trade, that actual word for carpenter was probably not correctly translated. The actual word was in the Greek was tekton, and tekton is the root word for technology. So it would have been a cutting edge craftsman, a master architect with advanced skills, possibly a stoneworker, designer, or master builder. This Mona Lisa of the ancient world was created during the adult time of Yeshua's life. So it is a possibility that he himself may have even designed or laid this tile or had something to do. We know that he probably worked in the city. It's an hour's walk from Nazareth, would have been an easy commute. And he would have walked here with Joseph or Joseph, his father, stepfather, every day and worked here. This was a place where there was money. Nazareth was just a poor little sleepy village, but this was a booming economy. And this is probably a place where we know he was highly intelligent by when he was 12 years old, how he was talking to the men in the temple. So he was probably in Sepphoris and working and making a name for himself. And we're going to find out next week that he was very wealthy. Okay, we're going to find that out next week. So listen to Mary's yes redeemed Eve. Okay, this is why we talked about Eve, because so many times Eve gets a bad rap, and but we've all given into temptation. We can't shake our finger at Eve, but we can also say we can identify with Mary, who said yes in the totally opposite way. She responded to an angel, not a fallen angel, but she had an encounter with an angel as well. So then in the 6th month, the angel Gabriel, okay, now if you know anything about biblical history and the origins of Genesis and the Bible, Lucifer is not an equal to God. He was an equal before he fell to Michael and Gabriel. So he was of that realm. Okay, so Hasatan, Lucifer, Satan that Eve encountered, his counterpart would have been Gabriel, who was faithful to God. Okay, and Gabriel was sent by Adonai into a town in the Galilee called Nazareth, and to a virgin engaged to a man named Joseph in the house of David. The virgin's name was Miriam. Her actual name was not Mary. Her actual name was Miriam. And coming to her, the angel said, "Shalom, favored one. Adonai is with you." But at that message, she was perplexed and kept wondering what kind of greeting that might this be. So she wasn't afraid. He said, "Don't be afraid, Miriam, for you have found favor with God." Okay, how has she found favor? Well, first of all, her lineage, okay, her pure line from Adam and Eve that had been protected all throughout history. And he said, "Behold, you will become pregnant and give birth to a son, and you shall call his name Yeshua." His name was Yeshua, which means, literally translated, salvation. His name, salvation. Okay, now, when he was on this earth, he was never called Jesus. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about that in a minute. So if you think his name matters, we talk a lot about the name above all names. There's power in the name of Jesus. But what if we've been calling him the wrong name? Okay. The letter J was not even introduced in any language until the year 1633. His name was not Jesus, is not Jesus. And I'm not trying to burst anybody's bubble. I've written songs. many songs about the name Jesus, one called "Run to the Name." Okay, that's one of my most popular songs I've ever written. But his name, Yeshua, he will be great and he will be called Ben Elyon. Adonai Elohim will give him the throne of David, his father. And she knew, right? She was very familiar. I'm sure that every day of her life, people reminded her that she was of the tribe of Judah and a direct descendant of David. She was like royalty. His father, he shall reign over the house of Jacob for all eternity, and his kingdom will be without end. Miriam said to the angel, "How can this be, since I'm not intimate with a man?" She asked a very intelligent question. And responding, the angel said to her, "The Ruach HaKodesh, which is Holy Spirit, will come upon you, and the power of Elyon, God, will overshadow you. Therefore, the Holy One being born will be called Ben Elohim, the Son of God. Behold, even your relative Elizabeth has conceived a son in her old age, and the one who was called barren is 6 months pregnant, for nothing will be impossible with God." And then Miriam said, "Behold, the servant of Adonai." Listen, her humility, right? The opposite of Eve, who was built, lifted up in pride. "Let it be done to me according to your word." And the angel left her. This young woman who was between 14 and 15 years old, knew that if she was found pregnant, not married, that in Deuteronomy, it was a death sentence. They could take her outside the city and stone her to death. But she trusted God and she said, "Let it be done to me according to your word." And the angel left her. So we have so much to thank Mary for. Can you imagine how much Yeshua must have admired and adored his mother? When he was on the cross, he looked at John and he said, "John, behold my mother." In other words, "John, take care of my mother." It was like the main thing on his mind when he died. His mother was such a champ. She was such a hero. She redeemed all of mankind by her yes. And I hear many times I've heard preaching, when God wants something done, he will use a man. Well, I dare to differ. There is a woman named Mary who redeemed us all, and she opened up the door for women to be equal, to be redeemed into their rightful place. And I'm so grateful to her. Now, I have never thought of it that way, because why? Because of the Catholics. I always was afraid to esteem Mary highly, because I'm not a Mary worshiper, but can we just give the woman the credit she deserves, right? She is a hero of the faith, and she carried the gospel before any man ever did. So we're so grateful to her. I just wanted to show you this really quickly. If you think his name matters, okay, this is the ancient Hebrew name of Yeshua, okay, and this is the current Hebrew name. This is a transliteration. It was transliterated into the Greek because the Greek people didn't, well, let's just say the Catholic Church did not like how Jewish the name Yeshua sounded. When Constantine legalized Christianity in the year 300, he tried to wipe out all signs of Jewishness because he was an anti-Semite. Well, it's very hard to erase all the Jewishness of Christianity when our entire faith is based on Judaism. So there were a lot of things lost in those years. Now, in the years where the early church, before the year 342, the early church, when it had the power and it actually toppled the Roman, the whole Roman Empire, because there were so many Christians. The evangelists and the missionaries were going forth, and they won, just out of the 120 that were in the upper room, they changed the entire world. Okay. But in 342, Constantine kind of decided, if he can't beat him, join him. And when he joined him, he changed all of the things that were Christian to pagan, and erased a lot of the Jewishness of all of the worship that the Christians had. Okay. And there was even by the Catholics, they murdered and slaughtered millions of Jews and Christians who maintained the Jewish roots. All right. This was, in Italy, all across Europe. We know that this was probably the greatest bloodbath ever in history. And when it was over, we had the Dark Ages. Okay. So this was a very dark time because of that they tried to erase the Jewishness of Christianity. Okay. So the first thing they transliterated to was in Innocuous. Okay. They wanted to say Yeshua's name was Innocuous. And then it was Iessus. Okay. And then again, this was the transliteration. They just tried to change it to something similar in Greek. Okay, now if I went to Israel today, they wouldn't call me a different name. They would call me Jaina. Okay, they wouldn't call me a different name. Why do we need to transliterate the name of the Messiah, which means salvation? Okay, then they, as the language developed, the Greek language, they decided Iesus. Okay, Iesus. And then in the year 1633, or about the year 1699, when the King James Bible was written, they went ahead and called it Jesus. So until the last part of the 1600s, so about 400 years, his name has been Jesus. Okay, so here's the deal. I don't think he's offended that you call him Jesus. I'm sure he still hears and answers our prayer. I absolutely know that 100%, because all my life I prayed to Jesus and Jesus answered me, and he loves me. Okay. But when I found out, I have a name that a lot of people mispronounce. My name is Jaina, and a lot of people call me Jana. My dad's name was Lawrence, and people called him Larry, and it would make him furious. He's like, one time I told him, Dad, this little girl at school said her dad is good friends with you. And Dad's like, well, what is his name? And I said, I don't know. But she said, my dad said he's best friends with Larry Bishop. And my dad said, let me tell you something. If anybody ever calls me Larry, they don't know me. They don't know me at all, because anybody that knows me would call me by my right name. I hate that name, Larry. And you know, I always kind of stuck with me. And I thought that was like, I was kind of taken aback because I had never, you know, heard anybody call my dad Larry and didn't know he was so mad about it. But you know, when you know somebody and you truly, the people that really know me, they call me by my real name, right? And when I found out his real name, and it was available to me, I love to call him Yeshua. And I do read from the Tree of Life version, but that doesn't make me a better Christian. That doesn't make me anything, except that's just my preference. Okay. So let's talk about the date he was born. Do you think the date he was born matters? So I'm asking you a question. Do you think his name matters? I'm just throwing it out there. But do you think the date he was born, before we talk about the birth, okay, before we go into the nativity scene, because that's our next slide. But the birth date from history, from when Yeshua was born, he was born September 11th or 12th, 3 BC. Okay, how do we know this? Because there was an astronomical event that happened in the heavens on that date where Jupiter lined up with Saturn in the constellation, or whatever it's called, of Leo. Okay, and this was a sign in the heavens, right? Leo, the lion of the tribe of Judah. So the ancients knew that every tribe of Israel has a constellation that corresponds with it. Okay, so this would be the king, the kingly, the sun, the king, Jupiter being the kingly, royal, and all of this. So it lined up. And this was on the Feast of Tabernacles, also lined up with a Jewish feast. And this is when the people were called to their hometown, which Joseph was called to Bethlehem, and the census, and people returned to their family seat for the celebration. Everybody would have been outside because during the Feast of Tabernacles, people sleep in what we call booths. They make an outdoor place and they all sleep outside. Okay, this is why there would be no room in the inn. Everybody's sleeping outside. Everything was full. Everybody was in town for the Feast of Tabernacles. Okay, this was the new year. Also, it's the Feast of Trumpets, when we will celebrate the return of the King. Okay, and in prophetic messianic tradition, the Messiah will come back on the Feast of Tabernacles. Also, a little known fact, and I have the picture here. So this picture at the bottom is the picture at the top is when the shepherds, they were the birthing time for the sheep is when the shepherds were out in the fields. Okay, so this would have been the time that the sheep gave birth during the Feast of Tabernacles and the fall feasts. But also in that bottom picture, on the last Feast of Tabernacles, before Yeshua, before Jesus was crucified, he was transfigured. He went to the Mount of Transfiguration on the Feast of Tabernacles. That was his last birthday. That was on his birthday. He went up the mountain. He took 2 of his disciples and he allowed them to see him being transfigured on that mountain. So that was his birthday gift from heaven. Wasn't that cool? So yeah, little known fact. So let's talk about the birth. We're almost done here. Now, Joseph also went up from the Galilee out of the town of Nazareth to Judah, the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was from the house and family of David. So was Joseph. He went to register with Miriam, who was engaged to him and was pregnant. But while they were there, the time came for her to give birth, and she gave birth to her firstborn son. She wrapped him in strips of cloth and set him down in a manger, since there was no room for them in the inn. Okay, there was no room. People were there from out of town. Everybody was outside, but in Bethlehem, outside of Bethlehem, there are caves where the sheep, the shepherds would keep their flock. Now in Israel, there's some pretty fabulous caves. I mean, there's some caves that are so beautiful, like, dude, I could live in here. These are so beautiful with giant high ceilings. They look like cathedrals. And this is the place that traditionally in Israel, yeah, there's a church called the Church in the Nativity, but the people, the historians, the archaeologists, they believe just right outside the city in some of those caves, and there are commemorative like museums and everything. This is the cave where they believe that the baby was born. So he was not born in a barn. He was born in a cave. Okay, this is even in this picture right here, it's depicted in a cave. So he was born in a cave, and when the angels came and celebrated his birth, it was very similar to the Transfiguration. On the Feast of Tabernacles, the shepherds came in and worshiped. Now, there were some midwives there, okay? There were the midwives, and they confirmed that she was a virgin at the birth. This is historical that, and also midwives were very prominent in ancient Israel, okay? There are two midwives that were very famous, Shiphrah and Puah, and these were two women that were very instrumental in saving Moses, because Moses was a deliverer. He was a type of Messiah. And the Bible talks about that Shiphrah and Puah, because they feared God, he gave them families of their own. And in Hebrew culture, they were the integral part of the healthcare system. And it was unlikely that a young woman who had never born a child would have ended up alone during her birth. And so labor for a first-time mother would have been 12 to 36 hours long, and it was very dangerous. And many women died in childbirth. And historically, the midwives were said to confirm at her birth that when the baby began to come out, that this woman is a virgin. Okay. Mary, they used probably essential oils during that time. You also remember that Mary was wealthy. She was a wealthy woman. She also was from a wealthy family and from was related to a priestly family. Okay. So she probably had access to things like frankincense and myrrh and some of the things that they would use for women in birth. What would they use myrrh for? They would use myrrh for the woman, for her episiotomy type, for her recovery. This was traditional. They would also use it for the cord of the baby. And then when a baby was born of the royal priesthood or any royalty, they would anoint that baby, their whole body, with frankincense, and they would speak to him in their ear, and they would pray over him. Hear, O Israel. They would whisper this in every child's ear when they were born. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one God. And these were the first words that he would have heard whispered in his ear by the midwives when he was born. More about Mary. We're almost finished here. She was the first woman to carry the gospel. Not only did she say yes to having the baby, but she raised him. She cooked for him. She cleaned for him. She had 4 other sons, and here are their names: James, Jude, Joseph, and Simeon. But actually, James's name was Yaakov. Again, this was changed by Constantine. He did not want Jacob or Jacob to be a name of a book of the Bible, so he changed it to James. So his name was not really James. His brother's name was Jacob, Jude, Joseph, Simeon. And the Bible says that he had at least 2 sisters in Matthew 13:55, when he said, who are my brothers and who are my sisters? And this was plural in the Greek. So we know that he had at least 2 sisters. So there were 5 sons and at least 2 daughters, maybe more, at least 7 kids. Okay. So he was from a good sized family. We know that Mary was so faithful to her son. She was present at the crucifixion. She was present at the resurrection and the ascension when he ascended to heaven. She was also there on Acts chapter 1 at the day of Pentecost. She was filled with the Holy Ghost and spoke in tongues, one of the original Pentecostals of the 120. Later in her life, she lived in Ephesus with John, who took care of her, and there she would have met Luke and given him the details of her life and birth there, as we can recount her story from the book of Luke, who was a physician, and he was really interested in all the details of the birth. She was the mother of the early church, and she helped establish the early church, and she was one of the greatest women, and maybe the greatest woman in all of history. And we are so glad that she said yes and changed history. So what happened after the birth? Well, they returned to Nazareth. They came back with the baby. She was probably ostracized and shunned by her community. She didn't go back to Sepphoris. She went back to live in Nazareth, a smaller town. Probably it was too much for her to live in Sepphoris, where she was from, just from how the people would treat her. She lived in this very small town, and her baby played on the hills of Nazareth. And Nazareth was up on a hill. And one of the interesting facts I learned when I was in Israel was Nazareth is up on this huge hill, almost like a small mountain. And then on the other hill, there's another mountain. But in that valley, it's the valley of Megiddo. And if you know anything about church history or about the future prophetic in the book of Revelation, there's a great battle that's going to be fought, the last battle of all the ages, when Yeshua himself will come back riding on a white horse with the saints from heaven and defeat all the armies of the enemy. And he'll come back with his triumphant return. Well, who knew? I didn't until I was there, that when you stand on the hills of Nazareth, you overlook that valley. So did he, as a little child playing on those hills, know that someday he would have to come and fight a battle for the ages in that very valley where he was from? Isn't that wild? And probably he had to walk right through that Megiddo Valley to get to work every day in Sepphoris. So I just think that's amazing. Like, you don't even believe, like, I can't even believe like how close it is. I mean, it's right there. So what happened with Mary? Well, 2 years later, this is where our next episode is going to take place. 2 years later, something happened that changed her life. 2 years later, these men, kingmakers, that were called the Magi, or the most powerful men in all the ancient world, came riding on a camel train to her house. And they came with some unbelievable gifts. And we're going to talk about that in the next episode, because they didn't come until 2 years later. And I'll prove it to you next week. So on the greeting cards, when you see the shepherds and the wise men, that never happened. It never happened. They were never all there all together. Proverbs 21:20 said, there's an oil in the house of the wise, and they come bearing much oil and many treasures for the baby, for the king that they knew, that was prophesied from the book of Daniel to be the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, the empire of the world. So they brought him gifts befitting the king. And I'll tell you who these men were. They're not who we thought they were. Matthew 25:29 is when Yeshua grew up. He told a parable about 10 virgins. And he said, go to the sellers of those who sell oils and buy some for yourselves. Okay. So if you're interested in getting some essential oils that we've talked about in this episode, and we will talk much more about next week on Tuesday. I can't hardly wait to tell you all the cool stuff that I found out as I've been studying deeply about the Christmas story. Herbs and oils were medicine in ancient times. There was no other medicine. That was the medicine. So there are some things hidden. Even in the book of Exodus, the first essential oil blend was given from God, Elohim himself, to Moses. Yes, it is a health secret that God intended us for us to have, to keep our health and to promote boost our immunity. Essential oils are the most powerful form of plant-based medicine. They are 75 times more powerful than herbs or teas. And why did Moses and Methuselah and all these men of old never get sick? Why did the high priest live longer than the priestly family live longer and have a longer longevity than other people in ancient times? It's because they had access to this holy anointing oil, and to frankincense and some of these other ones. So I have a special offer, and if someone else invited you to this class tonight, there's a special offer that we have for you. My link is right down here. You can screenshot it with your phone, or you can copy it down. It's right here. And you can get this special kit that's on sale with 5 essential oils. Some of these are the oils of the Bible. We have frankincense, On Guard, which is sort of like the holy anointing oil with the cinnamon and everything to promote healthy immune system. Lavender, which is in the story of the woman who worshiped him at his feet, Mary of Bethany. We also have tangerine oil, which is an amazing oil, and the supplements that are full of essential oils, including frankincense, to get you on a healthy and some healthy habits, some things to get your gut in order, and some pain relief. All of that. It's what's for Christmas. Healthy habits. It's what's for Christmas. And I have a code there. If you click on that link, you can join and you get 20% off this kit, which is $156, I believe, in change for Christmas, just for the month of November. So if you're interested in learning more about essential oils and getting into this oil life, we would love to have you be part of our team and be a part of the education that we provide on how to use these and how to be the healer in your home. This is our goal for you, because that is God's goal for us. He said, "Brethren, I would that you prosper and be in health, even as your soul prospers." It was never his intention for us to be sick or have sickness and disease. But before there was sickness and disease, there was a cure in the plants. And some of us have made it a priority in our life to learn how to use these oils for healing, not only for ourselves, but for our family and friends. And we would love for you to partake of this ancient knowledge in this present day, where we have married it with science. Over 100 PhD scientists in doTERRA, the purest, most powerful healing oils available in the world. And we would love to share this with you. So if you are interested in taking that step, living closer to nature, living more in the pattern of Yeshua with the frankincense and all the beautiful oils that we're going to learn a lot more about next week, we invite you to partake of that, or we can send you that link. You can DM me in Facebook, on Instagram, or text me, call me, whatever, and let's get you started on some healthy habits for 2022. So thank you all so much. I'm going to stop the recording. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. And I have so many good things for you next week. I'm going to stop the recording. And if anybody has any questions, we'll go there.